back. Sorry, we have a new one to talk about. As many of you know, we experienced quite a bit of a severe weather event over the Carolinas on Sunday night into Monday. So tonight, we are going to turn our attention to that. We have a whole host of guests on tonight. We have Rob Fowler on from Charleston, Ed Piotrowski on from Myrtle Beach, Shane Hilton on from New Bern, Brad Panovich on from Charlotte, Tim Buckley in Greensboro, Efren Afante in Columbia, Kendra Kent in Greenville, South Carolina, and Brendan Goldner, a reporter at WCNC Charlotte. So we really want to say our thank you to them publicly because we put this together at the last minute. So we're very happy for everyone to kind of donate a little bit of time tonight to talk about this. We are live streaming, so if you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear about you if you had experienced any of this storm throughout the past couple of days. So I'm going to toss it over to Brandon Goldner. Brandon, you've been out in the field reporting kind of the aftermath of the tornadoes. And something we've been talking about here on the Carolina Weather Group is the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we've talked about storm chasing and doing severe weather coverage from home. I know that you ran a little spot about the recovery efforts in COVID-19. I think we're going to dial that up, and then we'll toss it to Brandon and let him kind of give us a few of his remarks from his story.
Brian Morris,
You want to carry that one side?
is an essential worker.
Go out that way. Let's take it to the van.
He's cleaning up this Gastonia sunroom after a tree slammed into it, one of 5 emergencies his company, Custom US, had to go to.
It was kind of unique in that they were all very large trees, and that doesn't happen as much.
What also doesn't happen as much, cleaning up during a pandemic. Morris and his co-workers have to wear masks when going into people's homes. They also have to ask clients if they've been around anyone who's sick.
We've been keeping the pace.
Utility crews are also trying to keep the pace and restore power to nearly 39,000 customers. North Carolina Emergency Management Director Mike Sprayberry says the largest outages are in Mecklenburg, Anson, and Richmond counties. For families uprooted from their homes, the Red Cross's Robbie Sofoli says volunteers are helping them virtually, using platforms like FaceTime and Zoom to interview clients.
We are an organization that really relies on interpersonal connections with our clients and really trying to provide compassion and care. And it's a little difficult to do that right now, but we're adapting and using some of those different digital platforms.
Family and friends helped Robbie Clark's parents clean up a tree that crashed through their Kannapolis home, all while following social distancing rules.
I'm just hoping that everything gets sorted out pretty quick.
All right, so that was a report from Brendan Goldner. Brendan, I'm going to bring you in. This is something we've been talking about, COVID-19 and how it's affected the weather enterprise. As you was out reporting, talking to the folks, what was it like kind of in this new time that we're all experiencing?
You know, it reminds you, we're all talking all the time about reporting during the coronavirus, and yet, Mother Nature, the weather, doesn't care about pandemic. It's going to do its thing. And so, obviously there's the challenges with us as a crew. It was me and photojournalist Kevin Wardlaw. We have the 6-foot stick with the microphone at the end that we have to use to interview everyone. And we have to keep that social distance. But what was really fascinating was talking to some of the disaster recovery crew members, Duke Energy, the Red Cross, how a lot of them have had to change up a lot of what they're doing when it comes to cleaning up during the coronavirus. Duke Energy, they've been trying to do the social distancing, keeping the 6 feet distance, but when they're trying to repair power poles, a lot of times they have to be in close proximity. It's the same way with these disaster recovery people that was in the beginning of the story. They're wearing the masks. They have to ask everyone before they go into a house whether they or interacting with anyone with coronavirus. And it's the combination of all of the weather damage with having to deal with the coronavirus. So it's been really a double whammy for a lot of people.
And so, after disasters, we've seen it with the Nashville tornado, Jonesboro, Arkansas tornado a couple weeks ago. The community really comes together. How do you think that, how is the community interacting with their neighbor helping neighbor? Did you see any of that, even though we're in the midst of
It's actually a good point. We didn't see nearly as many people outside as normally, especially there was Monday, we were at there was a fire at a house caused by a tree that snapped power lines and then it went into a house, caused a fire. Thankfully, no injuries. But normally you'd see a lot of people out and about milling around asking for help. But really, there weren't a lot of people out. A lot of people were just standing on their porches. A couple people wandering up, but keeping that 6-foot distance. But it's a good point. We really didn't see those huge crowds of people like we normally do, and probably likely due to COVID-19.
Brendan, we appreciate that. We appreciate you joining us tonight, giving us that perspective. Hang around if you want to. I'm going to toss it to Dan. And Dan, you was out actually chasing this event. Maybe we can talk about that towards the end of the show, but I know you want to bring in one of our panel or one of our guests.
Yeah. So, talking kind of about some of the stronger tornadoes that hit there in South Carolina, I want to send it over to Rob there. There were a couple of significant tornadoes that hit, especially given the fact that this developed with not these ordinarily discrete supercells that would produce larger tornadoes, but they were within the line there. And especially we saw some interesting things like the Hampton County EF3, the Walterboro EF1s. Can you talk a little bit about that, Rob, that being in your area?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been here in Charleston for 33 years, and I've been through several tornado outbreaks, and I don't know how substantial compared to other parts of the country they are. We know every tornado for us is very important because we don't get that many, so we don't really prepare that often for these. But when we got here early on Monday morning to see what was going on in southeast Georgia, because these really started there and then crossed over the Savannah River and came all the way through eastern South Carolina. So to see the debris ball in Hampton County, which officially the winds are 165, they finished that survey and released it today, but it's on the cusp of an EF4. And I think here in South Carolina since 1950, only 3% are EF3s and 1% EF4s. So you're talking about something very rare for us in a state that, depending on which service you look at, averages 12 tornadoes a year. Then obviously, for us here in our Channel 2 viewing area, Hampton County is more in the Savannah area. Our neighbors down at WSAV taking care of that, but that's still in our state. But then Colleton County is the next state over, or next county over. And then we really got concerned there, seeing what was going on in Hampton, transferred to Colleton County. Colleton County, that was released. There were 3 separate EF1 tornadoes there. One of them 110 miles an hour that, if you saw the video, did damage at the Low Country Regional Airport. Unfortunately, we had 1 fatality there. A tree came through a house and killed a lady there. And then kept on moving into our more populated areas of Dorchester, Berkeley, and Charleston counties. Had a separate tornado that moved, probably started as a water spout, moved over Edisto Beach. And then they surveyed just a little while ago that Berkeley County, they released it. And that was an EF2 with the winds of 120 miles an hour. So, and then came into Ed's territory up into Georgetown County. We kind of share that. And they already had confirmed tornadoes up there. And I know Shea, WeatherFlow, you guys measured a wind gust of 114 miles an hour right there. So, Dan, to put it, I don't know. I'm still shaking my head. I'll put it that way. It was just something I've never seen before. And I've been through, a lot of the hurricanes that produce tornadoes like Francis, but this was unbelievable. In Irma, we had 4 tornadoes in the Charleston area, but I think we're all still shaking our heads.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and I was watching very closely on radar as that Hampton County tornado started showing up on radar in CC, and also kind of the debris ball that was showing up there. I mean, that was a significant signature on radar that you just don't often see in the Carolinas at all. It's something you generally see more in the deep south of Alabama, Mississippi, or in Oklahoma, Kansas, something along those lines. The damage report has it at least a half a mile of a width of that tornado. Fortunately, it seems like a lot of that did happen over rural areas, but that being one of the first tornadoes that happened in that early morning, did that kind of set a precedent for how you were responding to the other tornado warnings and potentially trying to get the message out to people who may have been asleep at this point, knowing that how huge these could be?
Absolutely, Dan. I think here personally, myself, Josh Marthers, our morning meteorologist, he was on the air on News 2. I was manning Facebook Live for a long period of time. We know that's become a major way to get information out and get information in. But I think we were looking at that couplet, which was, we just don't get to see that on velocity products very often here, and to see that continue to hold together all the way across the state. Absolutely. We were able to give warnings upstream. And I know it's a cliche, you know, people write in saying, hey, because we watched you, you probably saved our lives. But I think in this situation, it really comes to play, because we could show it, we could tell them, we knew where it was going, we knew who might be impacted. And if we could give them any warning at all, this was the case. Most of our tornadoes that happen could be a water spout. The couplet's not as well defined. It could be very broad in some cases. So this was really fine, that I think it really prepped us for what we had to do for the rest of the morning. But I think probably the saving grace for all of us is the fact that with the crisis going on, schools were not in session, people were not going to work, they were not in the car on the highways going from point A to point B. So if anything, I think we were able to reach a lot of people in their house, and they could just hunker down right there.
And Rob, also, I wanted to ask, you know, how was your response with your audience this early in the morning? This is really early, right? So a lot of folks just waking up. There's no commute, but we did get a couple of days of warning out for this event to start happening, right? So we kind of got the word out. But how do you feel folks responded to your?
I think the preparation was great. I loved Marshall Shepard's tweet going into this. He said, I don't want to hear anything about this came out of nowhere, or where did this come from? Because I think the warnings were there. SBC did a fantastic job, and we tried to disseminate that information here to our viewers, that, you know, we couldn't tell them exactly what was going to happen that Monday morning, but we knew that as time crunched a little bit, we felt more confident that something was going to happen and could potentially be a pretty significant outbreak. So I think our viewers were well prepared, and I haven't heard a single comment like, where did that come from? And I never knew that was coming. So I think they were listening, and hopefully we were getting the information to them as quickly and as succinctly as we possibly could.
Efren, I'd love to hear your perspective on the Midlands, because unfortunately you guys saw the highest number of EF3s, as well as an EF2 that passed real close to Orangeburg and even over I-26. How has the community responded to all of these tornadoes, and what kind of steps are y'all taking to recover?
Well, the cleanup process right now has been incredible. There's been a lot of community help in this, and even with the coronavirus, in which a lot of people are taking heed to that warning, there was a very large presence of people helping out. Now, the EF3 tornadoes that came through part of the CSRA, the Low Country, into eventually our Southern Midlands community, those areas are very rural. And the fortunate thing was that we were already on the air at 4:30 in the morning. And there were a lot of storms that were crossing over the Savannah River into the upstate, but there was already a knowledge of all of our viewers, since we've been talking about it in earnest since Friday, that we're looking at the possibility of strong thunderstorms. That was the message on Friday. The message on Friday was like, there's very likely going to be a severe weather outbreak of some sort in the lower Mississippi River Valley. That message usually is taken with a grain of salt, because it's not us. It's not even near us. And as we got into Saturday, our morning meteorologist, Danielle Miller, started emphasizing that we're looking at the possibility of strong to severe storms in South Carolina. Half of the models from Storm Prediction Center and their risk included the northwest half of South Carolina, and then on Tuesday, the eastern half. So the message was already out there, and by Sunday, it was a clear message that this is going to be an event that we're going to see storms on Sunday, probably late morning, that may be strong to severe, but at least the knowledge that there is going to be storms on Sunday, but that's only the first round. The stronger storms and the worst ones are going to be in the overnight hours, and that was the biggest emphasis that we sent the message. And the worst part was waiting. As a couple of us were talking about before the show started, the Storm Prediction Center alluded to the fact that there were two significant models. One that was indicating that these storms would very likely start entering portions of the South Carolina upstate and the high country by late morning, and by midday crossing to the areas from northwestern North Carolina into the Piedmont and the PD down to the Midlands into the early afternoon. that would have been the worst case scenario. The evolution of the storms were far greater, and the magnitude of the damage would have been far greater. The other model was one that verified, showed that it came in a lot earlier. The problem is that when you have storms that are that early in the morning, and the first tornado warning actually came out, I believe it was 6:30. That was the tornado warning that was in Richmond and Columbia County in Georgia. And then once it crossed over to South Carolina, it was still warned. At that point, we're already talking about it in earnest, that these storms are tornadic. One is already confirmed, and this has got a direction that will be impacting part of our Southwest Midland communities. And at that point, things just exploded. The one interesting thing that we did watch very carefully and with great concern was when the tornado was confirmed crossing out of Richmond County, crossing into Richmond County, Georgia, into Aiken County, South Carolina. Within 3 or 4 scans for about 12 minutes, we noticed that the inflow was pushing at about probably 95 to 100 miles an hour, but there was no debris ball. Once it got right along the county line of Barnwell and Aiken County, there was no doubt a debris ball. Within a span of 5 to 7 minutes, 2 scans later, we now see 2 debris balls. And I mentioned on chat, I was like, guys, do we have twins? And they said, we definitely have a TDS on both storms. So now we got a bigger issue. We now have 2 tornadoes that are heading almost in the same direction, at least parallel. And the message is already out. You have to take your tornado precautions. The craziest part about this is that, and I'm sure a lot of the meteorologists here will say, Rob alluded to it, this is something that does not happen in the Carolinas. We're well known for the Carolinas to have the type of tornadic event that's low cape, high shear, versus when you go out into the central and southern plains is the exact opposite. But we've had our fair share of tornadoes that have been low cape, high shear, but nothing to this magnitude. I'm really hoping that the viewers were prepared. Unfortunately, we had 2 deaths out of the EF3 tornado that went through Western Orangeburg County in the community of Livingston, and as well as 7 injuries. But this happened at least later in the morning. If this happened 2 or 3 hours earlier, the result could have been significantly different.
Efren, you were talking about the twins. There's some speculation on Twitter, and after looking at the radar scans, it could have kind of been like a Fujiwara effect, like they were kind of dancing around each other. Any comment on that?
That's a good possibility. Keep in mind that the only data that we can go off, since we can't really go off of any visual satellite, is off of the radar, but that is the possibility. However, both of the debris balls were running parallel to each other, probably about 7 to 8 kilometers apart, but they were going unidirectionally. Usually when you see a Fujiwara effect, you see the debris balls that are actually dancing around each other. They really weren't dancing around. They were running parallel. So at the very least, we know that this was 2 confirmed separate tornadoes. Was the debris ball and eventually the second one from the original tornado that came out of Aiken? Because the deadly tornado actually originated in northern Bamberg County, northern Barnwell County, and then eventually moved into southwest Orangeburg County. But just as the initial tornado dissipated, the other one continued going. So I don't believe, in my best experience, that was the Fujiwara effect. It could have been, but I didn't see enough motion between the 2 TDSs to facilitate that idea.
Yeah, definitely a busy morning for you guys. I want to bring in Kendra Kent. This is kind of where as the storm system moved in, it kind of hit her area first. Kendra, first of all, we hope we can see you or hear you.
Sorry, Scotty.
You're fine. We can hear you now. And I just want to ask you, I know you guys kind of started the live coverage first when these storms first moved in.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about your morning and how things went there in the Greenville area.
Well, I feel like I learned a lot from this particular outbreak. And can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry you can't see me. I hooked up to a computer that doesn't have a camera, apparently. Anyway, no, we started the coverage a little after midnight. We had a rogue warning. It was a essentially a shower that just started rotating. You could tell how much dynamically was going on in the atmosphere. I mean, it was just, things were beginning to blow up. So I think I knew from about 12:30 in the morning that we were going to have a very, very long night. We ended up with an EF3 tornado. And as we were talking about earlier, that's incredibly rare in South Carolina, especially in the upstate. I feel like we get wedged in so much with cool air. It's so rare we can have all of this come together to produce such an event. And this was the biggest in the upstate, the strongest since 1994. It hit Seneca. We were on air with the storm as it moved into Stevens County, Georgia. And I had a unique experience with it because my parents live in Seneca. And that was probably the first time I had to cover a storm while I was slightly emotionally distraught. And I had Isaac Williams, who's also on here. You just can't, he's also without a video. But he was pointing out the TDS. And as soon as I saw that, I got that panicked feeling. You know, I started breathing a little heavy. I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? But we did. And luckily my parents were fine. But I'm sure many of you have been through that because we've all, you know, many of us have lived in these areas for a long time and you get personally impacted by these storms. But what I learned the most is not to underestimate the timing of something. I feel like I didn't write this event off, but I wasn't necessarily expecting anything like this given the time it was coming in. 3 to 6 a.m. I mean, who expects an EF3 tornado to rip through the heart of your area at 3:30 in the morning? And mostly we get these QLCS lines that produce these brief EF0, EF1 tornadoes. That's what we're used to. And seeing something like that and tracking something like that was a true first for me. And, you know, it was just a million different emotions all at once. That's for sure.
Kendra, since you said Isaac's there, I'll pose this to both of you guys, both of y'all. You had this coming through the rogue cell, and then like the heart of this event was when people were actually asleep, you know, 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Talk about how you guys were able to message before the event. And, you know, with this being this late, talk about your schedule too, because I know I was watching the coverage in Chattanooga and hearing of the major damage that happened there. And I'm like, man, I've got to get a little bit of sleep before this comes into our area. So kind of talk about that, because I know a lot of us were watching beforehand to just see what was coming our way.
Let's see. Is Isaac's mic up?
I think it's muted, but we can. Okay, it's unmuted. It's unmuted. He's good now.
Okay.
You go ahead, Isaac.
Okay. Thanks for having me briefly. I'm one of the morning people, so I'm like almost up past my bedtime here. But so just to kind of with the messaging and, you know, any rest, unfortunately for me, I have plenty of interest in Mississippi and Alabama. That's where I'm from. And, you know, for whatever reason, a lot of people still ask me, you know, about the weather there, and they depend on me, and that's great. So I didn't actually sleep going into this event. So that's not uncommon for me because I am a severe weather nut. But that being the case, in terms of messaging, you know, we started talking about it, I think, on Wednesday. Just kind of highlighting the threat for storms. That gave people about 5.5 days, you know, and of course we started ramping up, you know, the wording a little bit more once we got to, you know, Friday and Saturday. And, you know, Kendra always, you know, mentioned, like, when I first was hired here, we do get a lot of wedge events, and we started that day in the 50s. And I'm like, back in my head, you know, I thought, what if the wedge holds and, you know, we're going to be seen as like hype people, and, you know, that's not what we want, but we don't want severe weather either. I think our message was pretty stern by Sunday morning when we got up and saw they had pulled that enhanced risk over a little bit into the upstate, which, you know, I've been here 3 years, not nearly as long as Kendra, but I think that's only my personal third enhanced risk here. So, you know, I knew that I see parameters, and parameters mean nothing unless you have a storm in them, you know, but I knew with those parameters that we had the potential to have something, you know, fairly unusual happen, but I wouldn't have had the I don't work weekends, so I don't even know if I would have said something about a strong tornado even the night before, just because it's just so rare to get them here.
Yeah, and I think just given how late it was at night, and we knew this was likely going to be taking at least some linear form. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that either, and it really it caught us off guard. But to see a TDS like that move through our area, and I know the rest of you all saw that too as South Carolina meteorologists. I mean, just something you don't see every day, and it kind of takes your breath away. Just they're used to that in Alabama and Mississippi. We just don't get that stuff here.
Yeah, and then right after that. Right after the Seneca one had briefly lifted right over Clemson, we had the EF2, what ended up being an EF2, another TDS outside of Slater, which that's, almost in the 3,000 feet elevation, in the extreme northern part of Greenville County. So that debunks the whole tornadoes can't happen in the mountains thing,
Definitely. So we were watching that, Evan and I, because Evan doesn't live too far from the line there. One last question, and we'll come back to you guys later on in the show. But at the time, we didn't know how long the tornadoes were on the ground. But I think one of the tornadoes there in the Greenville, Pickens County area was on the ground for around 8 miles. So this were not also big tornadoes, but they're also long track tornadoes, something that we're not too accustomed to as well.
Yeah, again, that was a huge shocker. But when you saw the signatures on radar, there was no doubt that was going to be a large tornado. And they even put that in the wording of the warning, which I was very happy about. I feel like that really brought people's attention up. And the thing you mentioned earlier too, these were happening at 3:30 in the morning, probably the worst time a tornado could hit. I mean, when people are in their deepest sleep, and all you can do as a broadcaster is beg people to wake up their kids, get their dog, whatever they need to do, get to their lowest level. And so I feel like this was one of the scariest nights for our viewers, hands down, and no less scary for the rest of the state, of course, but at least it was more toward daybreak for some of you guys. But yeah, for us, it was just the dead of night, and we were just hoping that people were heeding the warnings.
Right.
And for sure, with that, with the Seneca one, we were in a situation where the TDS was so strong, so fast, I don't want to say it came out of nowhere, but that TDS appeared and it was violent looking, on the first scan that I saw. And we were dealing with the situation, once it went past Clemson, I think we had debris fallout on CC. So we weren't positive that it actually wasn't still down, because it still looked like, something could be there. You thought it was debris being fanned out or whatever, but you weren't sure, even though the circulation looked a little weaker. But I'm like, we're not going to take any chances with it. Obviously the tornado warning was still in effect. And, that was another little unique challenge, is that I've never actually dealt with debris fallout before, where we said, okay, well, this signature is debris, and yet something similar was happening down the line. And we're like, well, this may be actually debris that's still being lofted, but the tornado's not still down. So it was a very unique situation. Again, Kendra keeps bringing this up. It was in the middle of the night at 3:30 in the morning, but I feel like people were wide awake and they were watching and they were prepared, which is good. All through the days, we were Kendra made a graphic, I think on Thursday, that said, what do you need to do? It was just a simple little headline graphic, but it was so informative about charging your batteries, keeping your phone on not silent if you sleep with it on do not disturb. I remember saying Friday morning, what you can do, you can, sleep with it on loud for one night, because it can help save your life. So it was a insane, again, I worked in Mississippi. I've dealt with, plenty of tornadoes in my day, but yet this is still a first for me as well.
All right. And I'm going to go ahead and bring Ed Piotrowski from WPDE in Myrtle Beach. And Ed, we saw what looked like the tail end of this Hampton County tornado pop out all the way over at Murrells Inlet. Brad Panovich was nice enough to share a link with us. I'm going to pull it up here and share my screen. Let's see if we can get it to work here. And the tornado that you're seeing here in Hampton County there's some debate of whether or not it started over on the Georgia side of the Savannah River, but if we look at the start of the track and draw it all the way over to where it exited the South Carolina coast here, then we're looking at about 144 to 158 miles, somewhere in that vicinity. And so, we know this continued on, maybe up even into the Oak Island area of North Carolina, but it's just impressive to see the length and track of that storm. It did pop out in Myrtle Beach, where one of our weather sensors for weather flow got a reading of 114 miles an hour. We had a pressure drop of 7 millibars within a 1 minute time span. So that reading went up within 2 to 3 minutes, from 46 to 76 miles an hour to 114. And so talk about that area and how it affected your viewing portion of that area of Myrtle Beach. And I think you're on mute, so you may want to just unmute yourself real quick.
I'll help you, Ed. Oh,
there we go. Somebody muted me. I don't know what happened. Not the first time, that's for sure. But for us, considering what happened across the rest of South Carolina, we were relatively unscathed. We had no injuries and no deaths. There was never really any really tight circulation anywhere in our viewing area. We were, of course, watching the ones that were over Orangeburg County and also down near Hampton County in the morning while we were on the air with our regular morning show at 5 o'clock in the morning. And those were the two big storms, two supercells that we were watching very carefully, knowing that they were heading generally in our direction. The one in Orangeburg County faded away before it ever got to our viewing area. But the one in Hampton County that eventually went over Monk's Corner, eventually got into Georgetown County, and they warned for that one where there was EF1 damage done in Sandpit and Graves. And then you hit a really populated area on the south end of the Grand Strand where Litchfield Beach is located and Pawleys Island as well. And they both took a hit by an EF0, EF1 tornado. There was substantial damage done to trees and even some homes in Litchfield Beach and also in Willbrook. In fact, one of the things about a lot of people being home is a lot of people took video. So we were able to get pretty good video of at least damage and high wind knocking over trees, but not necessarily a tornado touching down. And then, of course, it went out over the ocean, became a water spout, and that's when it rolled over the Murrells Inlet jetties with the recording of 114 mile per hour winds. And I look back in that and I think, my goodness, if that was just a couple of miles west of there, we would have had substantial damage on the south end of the Grand Strand. And if it had paralleled the Grand Strand coast, it could have buzzsawed the entire Grand Strand, nearly 60 miles with extensive damage. So we were very fortunate that it actually went out over the ocean. And that was really the only set of tornadoes from that particular supercell that we had in our viewing area. Although I will say in Marlborough County, which is just to the east of Chesterfield County in the northern part of the state, we had a massive microburst of 110 mile per hour winds that did substantial damage in Wallace. And of course, everybody, when they get that kind of wind, thinks it was a tornado. But in reality, it was a microburst. Although on radar, it did have some rotation. It wasn't very tight there either. But Steve Paff, who works with the National Weather Service in Wilmington, those guys do a phenomenal job. They went out and did the survey yesterday and were able to pinpoint where they had 80 to 110 mile per hour winds. And, typically for us, in the summertime, we get those pulse thunderstorms where we'll get 60, 70, maybe 80 mile per hour winds with a collapsing thunderstorm. But in all the years I've been here, I can't recall one time where we've had a microburst that caused 110 mile per hour winds. But you hear it all the time. They're just as damaging sometimes as tornadoes.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, just looking at that, the one at Litchfield, they classified as an EF2. Do you think the Waccamaw River Basin had something to do with reforming of that? Or do you think the mechanical features, right, when it came to land, maybe helped with strengthening or re-intensifying that system?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I don't know if you want to call it debate, but there's a lot of speculation out there that there could have been some sort of a influence of the ocean, the wind coming in off the ocean at that time, perhaps creating some sort of a boundary to help intensify the storm itself. But yeah, it was an EF0 over Litchfield Beach, and then it blew up to an EF2 when it went over the Murrells and the jetty. So it got pretty strong fairly quickly. And again, we were lucky that was over the ocean. Literally, the jetties are only a couple of 100 yards away from very populated areas of Garden City. And we had two different people that have homes there who have their home weather units, and they both registered 71 and 72 mile per hour winds respectively. So literally within a couple of hundred yards of where your unit is, we had those measurements. So you can see how tight the wind gradient was between Garden City and the actual jetties themselves.
Hey, Ed, there was something, you always try to find something that'll make you laugh in these sad times. And unfortunately, we had some sad times in the Carolinas, but there was a tweet going around of you doing your broadcast. I don't know. I've asked James about it, if we can play it. But,
Here it comes.
all right, I'm going to let it play, and then I want you to talk about it.
Okay.
It's loading up live.
Good, no audio is the best.
That was a close light. Rain is located, and we'll zoom that out just a bit. And whoa! Oh! That was a close lightning strike. I don't know if you heard that at home, but I feel like I need to change a short.
All right, I'm pulling the audio back down, but Scotty and Ed, the viewers at home heard it, even though we didn't hear it in our headsets. Ed, what's going through your head there?
Well, we were in a sense just about ready to wind down. We were getting through this thing for the most part relatively unscathed. Our last severe thunderstorm warning was still in effect, but the storm was moving out of Horry County. And then there must have been a lightning strike within a couple hundred yards to the station, because it was this loud explosion that you knew what it was, but you're a human being. It freaked me out. And as you saw, I kind of ducked thinking something was going on, and then just use one of my classic lines, I need to change the shorts. Just one of those things. And that kind of went around the viewers. A lot of them had recorded it and were sending it to me, letting me know that they thought it was kind of funny. And it's something that, that they needed after a morning like that, being so stressed, and of course being stressed with COVID-19. It was a little light moment toward the end of the severe weather when we knew we didn't have any injuries, which was a good thing. And of course, nobody was killed either.
Always good to have a funny moment there. So I want to bring it up to Shane. Shane lives just north of the Myrtle Beach, Wilmington area. Shane, you guys kind of got in on the tail end as well, as the sun was already up. Talk to us about the New Bern, Greenville, North Carolina area, and what you guys experienced.
Yeah, we were kind of late to the party, I guess, compared to everyone else in regards to receiving the storms, but very much like Ed's situation, very thankful and blessed really to not have any injuries or fatalities with any of our systems. We did end up having 6 confirmed tornadoes. And thankfully for us, the strongest was the EF1 that we had in the Hawes Run area. I believe I've been taking notes here just to make sure it was anywhere from roughly 100 to 110 mile per hour sustained winds. So for us, it was basically like that waiting game where you see the line coming. I was actually filling in for our morning meteorologist. He had a vacation day, but he got reeled back in right towards the end of it. So I was basically tracking it all the way since it was in the mountains, and just waiting, just holding our breath. Our morning broadcast finished up. We had declared it a severe weather alert day for our station, so we were cutting in. We would normally cut in every hour, but our morning meteorologist says, you know what, let's just go ahead and do every half hour. And it was actually very fortunate and wise that we did that, because during the half hour cut in at 9:30, with about maybe 1 minute left in my cut in, our weather radio starts going off in the weather center. And then I said, okay, well, we're starting now. And we were on for an hour and a half with all of the tornado warnings. There just came a point where when we were swapping off, he would just say, we have 4 tornado warnings. And I'd have to interrupt and say, I'm sorry, no, we're at 5 now. I was like, it just keeps on going back and forth. And it was just like a straight line. So when we're trying to describe it for our viewers, it was almost like a complicated mess. And honestly, that's what I started describing it whenever we would switch off and I would be on the screen. I would just say, I know it is very difficult to kind of pin everything out because every warning was overlapping. And I think with my experience with tornadoes, with coverage I've had, which naturally have had many, especially with our hurricane coverage that we've seen over the years, I've never seen that many warnings stacked back to back to back in a straight line. It was fascinating, but also terrifying at the same time, because you feel like you need to give equal coverage to each warning in each area in your viewing area. Even though we knew the strongest one at the time was the one we were seeing to the south, simply because it had held for the longest amount of time. It seemed like it had the strongest signature. Looking back on social media after everything kind of died down a bit, I was able to see what other meteorologists from around the country had done and taken screenshots, and seeing all the feedback and all the scans of it that we weren't even able to see at the time, because we were having to bounce in between 6 different tornado warnings all at the same time. But looking back on it, it was very clear, seeing everyone's screen grabs of the tornado warning to the south, that was the strongest one. It had the strongest sustained winds. It had the longest track out of all the tornadoes that we were tracking that morning.
And Shane, one thing we were noticing, because we were watching that storm, is it was going through a fairly populated area. Jacksonville, that's probably one of the bigger cities out eastern North Carolina. So I'm sure that was kind of pressing to want to get that information out to one of the bigger population areas.
Absolutely. And what was really interesting, something I've never been able to do before while we are doing severe weather coverage, is to be able to pick up anything too crazy on our web cameras. And we did have a webcam situated in the Jacksonville area near the Freedom Fountains. And while we did not see the feature at all, you could see it looked like the flags about to be ripped off of the top of the flagpoles. I've never seen that before, and never been able to capture anything during the height of a storm or during a warning before, until this particular system. So naturally, yes, we did have all that concern, because even for our specific station, Jacksonville is a very heavy populated area into which they tune into us. They know that we are the closest station to them, so they rely on us heavily. But thankfully, I believe the heaviest damage that was sustained in that area was at a hog farm. So we might have a few pigs that won't be tuning into our broadcast next time. But like I said, just very thankful and blessed that we had 0 fatalities, 0 injuries throughout the entire morning.
Shane, I got a good chuckle out of that. Thank you. Tim, we still have 2 areas to cover, Charlotte and Greensboro. So Tim, I want to start off with you. I know you're just dying to talk. We've had you waiting for 40 some odd minutes now, but you guys did have 1 tornado in Alamance County. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that, and maybe some of the relief that you felt that there was only 1 and things weren't quite as bad as they could have been?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys. So, this kind of thing that we were tracking for days, all of us were tracking it for days. It was pretty much all anyone could talk about for the Easter weekend. So one of the things leading up to it, I kind of sensed I was kind of trying to read the room and on my Facebook page and just see where people's heads are at. It really seemed like people were dreading this, and they were very freaked out, and they really were spooked, just in the sense of maybe they were stressed out already. I am not a psychologist, but there was just a lot of stress building up. And I think whenever something is coming in the middle of the night, people are really worried, and justifiably so. So one of the things we decided to do is just let them know, we're going to be there the whole night, because even with, we had the warm front coming through in the afternoon. I'm always worried about those little warm fronts too. You can kind of get little spin ups. So I was there starting at 8, 9 o'clock, and I just stayed till the morning. We had the rest of the morning Mets come in as well to help out. And good thing that we did, because, one of the things, we just kind of walked people through the night. We would just do Facebook Lives, and they would chime in, and we would say, everything's still okay. You can go to bed, but make sure you have the phone. And you got to wake up if the warnings are issued. And people really did that, and I think it helped out. But you mentioned we had 1 confirmed tornado in our area. We had 9 tornado warnings, and I had no problem with any of the tornado warnings. And a lot of times I'm complaining in the back of my head about some of them, right? None of them were light tornado warnings at all. There was so much rotation in almost every storm that was pushing across our area. Everyone in this chat knows this. We have a radar issue here. The radar beam is so high. So of course, when we're showing these warnings, it's showing more mid-level rotation. It's not at the ground. So all we can do is say, hey, this storm is spinning like crazy. Our first tornado warning came in at 4:20 in the morning, and we had continuous tornado warnings until 7 in the morning. So we were on for a while with all of those different storms. And it turned out that the last one in Alamance was the one that, in fact, was confirmed. And we confirmed it on air, too. You know, we were watching it, Taran Kirksey and myself, and there was a clear as day debris ball just a few scans after the first couplet showed up. So I believe they talked about this in South Carolina, too. Some of these, they formed, they came right down, and they did the damage right away. And it was very quick. And thank goodness, you know, the Weather Service did a bang up job. They had a warning on it right away. And we were just bouncing around. It was a very busy morning. But I think people were very appreciative that we were there the whole time with them, just kind of holding their hand. You know, there's this storm, here's what you do. Grab the kids, grab the dog, put a helmet on, put shoes on, and get ready to go. And, you know, we made through it. Thankfully, there weren't there were no injuries or fatalities in that one tornado. On the same token, in the squall line itself, we did have a tree, unfortunately, kill somebody in their home. And one of the things with this line that we also tried to do, you have to give the highlight coverage to the tornado warnings, but this whole squall line, we knew it was capable of putting down 80 plus mile per hour gusts just with all the wind fields. So we did try and bounce around and say, hey, you're not in a tornado warning in Guilford here right now, but this line is nasty, so you should probably be in your safe spot too. So it was a very busy morning, but we anticipated it. Everybody in the weather enterprise talked about it for days. People knew about it. And I actually think it's a big success story that in the middle of the night, people were still well prepared and took good action. And the fatalities really, I think, were minimized, at least in the Carolinas, as far as I could tell.
And Tim, you're already kind of making my transition easy, because the second question I wanted to ask was about, there was some information going around on Facebook before the storm that was a little bit unsettling for a lot of viewers, and it was definitely not accurate information. But I know that you were definitely a part of reassuring people, reassuring your audience that the storm, while yes, it was definitely going to be dangerous, this was not something that they couldn't handle. Talk about the importance of the trust that your viewers have in you, and how you're the source where they get all of their information from.
I mean, social media is a blessing and it's a curse, right? Like it gives good information and it gives bad. There was some post floating around out there that was advertising potential for EF5 tornadoes in North Carolina, even though we've not had one before on record. But people were freaked out initially. We of course saw the damage in Mississippi and Alabama. That can freak people out here when they know it's coming our way. So, you know, one of the things I tried to do in the days up leading to the event is, you know, everyone's freaked out right now just in life. I don't get freaked out by weather. I'd get freaked out a little bit about this pandemic, if I'm being honest. So one of the things I told them was just saying, hey, you know, we're living in crazy times. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with daily life with this virus and stuff, but we know how to handle severe weather. We have the technology. We do this every year. We got this. It could be bad, but we know what to do. And if it is bad, we're going to let you know about it. We're not going to go crazy. We're just going to let you know where the storm is, where it's going, what you should do, and what to do next time, because there's always a next time with weather. This is not abnormal, really. We had a lot of tornadoes, but you know, 1 year ago, basically in April, North Carolina had 12 tornadoes also. So this is not really that different. We do know what to do. And I think that was reassuring to folks, just to let them know, hey, okay, well, they're used to this. They're going to keep us covered. And that's really the whole reason why we're here. We're not here for the sunny days like today. I could not show up and it would be fine. But, you know, Monday, we're pretty important to keep folks calm and hopefully encourage them to make the right choices. And I think a lot of people did.
Absolutely. Yeah. Scotty.
And so, Tim, talking about radar coverage, that brings me to Mr. Brad Panovich. And Brad, unfortunately, we had a tornado kind of go under the radar, like that little pun there, in the Charlotte area. So we had one in Anson County, but you know, you've been on the show several times talking about our radar gaps, and this one kind of bit us in the behind because we didn't catch this one.
Yeah, and I'll give a little bit of a pass to the Weather Service on this one because I think Tim brought up a good point. Something we were doing on the air Monday morning was we were telling everybody to treat the severe thunderstorm warnings like tornado warnings on Monday morning because every severe thunderstorm warning had a tornado tag in it, and we knew the environment that these storms had. I didn't want people near a window or near the outside walls with straight line winds on Monday morning. So we actually, for the first time in a long time, I basically treated every severe thunderstorm warning like a tornado warning. But you're right, there was no warning with the 2 tornadoes we had touched down in Anson County. Even though in hindsight, looking back even at the Raleigh radar, there were signs of rotation. But I mean, we were all looking at radar Monday. I could have issued 100 different tornado warnings on some of these. It was just, you knew there was probably a tornado in there. There were several times I saw little couplets trying to spin up where you saw that inflow notch starting to increase and you're waiting for the outflow to kind of kick in, and it never did. So, there probably was numerous small spin ups in there that we never recognized, but it does highlight the same issue, right? We've had this huge radar hole over the Charlotte metro area that goes up into the Greensboro metro and really out towards the Fayetteville area. It's kind of that triangle of just horrible radar coverage. So the Raleigh office, they're trying to issue a warning in Anson County, which is basically closer to Charlotte than it is Raleigh. And the 2 radars they're looking at is Raleigh, Greer, and a terminal Doppler at Charlotte Douglas, which doesn't actually have the range to make it into Anson County. So it's a tough situation in a morning like that. Unfortunately, that tornado did damage about 10 homes. It was an EF2, and we had several farms damaged. So it did quite a bit of damage, actually picked up a couple mobile homes, but it does highlight the issue. I just hope that at some point, I think this COVID-19 thing has kind of set back our North Carolina radar project to do some private-public partnerships. But this problem's not going to go away. And hopefully in the very near future, we'll have, the goal is to have 3 C-band 1,000,000-watt dual pole radars spaced out over that radar gap to enhance radar coverage going forward. But man, that was, every time this happens, I'm like, I wish I had a better look. I wish I had it, especially that time of the morning when no one's spotting these things. You need that radar coverage. And it really makes it difficult. And I'll just say one of the things about the coverage that morning, everybody knew this was coming. The only messaging issue that I had with this whole event was because of the timing being between day 1 and day 2 outlooks from SPC, there was a lot of disconnect about this thing like skipping over us. And the one thing I tried to do Sunday night and Monday morning was like, hey, you got to understand the day 1 outlook goes from 8 a.m. Sunday to 8 a.m. Monday. And then the new one comes out for Tuesday. It's 8 a.m. Tuesday to 8. And so it looked like it was going to jump over the Piedmont, but it really was just an artifact of it being right at that time of day between the 2 outlooks. So that was the only issue I had communicating. A lot of people thought this was going to happen on Sunday, and it really was a Monday morning event. So from that standpoint, I'm glad a lot of people paid attention, but the timing was a real problem because of the way the outlooks are issued from SPC.
Ideally, we'd like to have had it from midnight to midnight. I think that would have had a much better perspective of what's going on. For the viewers, a few asking about radar. For those who may not be familiar with radar, tell us why the Charlotte area, the Greensboro area, Fayetteville area is kind of in that hole. Why does the radar miss those areas?
Oh man, it's a lot of politics. I'm not going to lie to you. When the Weather Service was reorganized, for whatever reason, Charlotte, which is, I'm biased, I live here, but it is the biggest city between Atlanta and Washington, D.C., all right? It does not have a radar within 50 miles of the biggest population center in this part of the country. And that doesn't just affect us. It affects Tim up in Greensboro and Winston-Salem. It affects Hickory, Boone. It affects a large area. And so there's some little stopgaps. And I hear this all the time from people, well, you got a terminal Doppler radar. I'm like, all right, terminal Doppler is a Band-Aid. It's like a little tiny Band-Aid that helps fix a little bit of the issue. But, if I had to tell another meteorologist, hey, I'll take your 88D out and put a C-band, non-dual pole radar there to take you out, they would never want that, right? They would want an 88D dual band radar. And so it's just a Band-Aid approach. And we just have a huge issue with it. And it's unique to Charlotte. We are the biggest city in the country that does not have a radar within 50 miles of the city. So luckily, local governments are recognizing this problem. We've brought it to their attention. I think everyone brings up their phone app and goes, oh, we've got radar coverage. A lot of people don't understand that radar are like cell phone towers. The farther away you are from the dish, the worse your reception is. And so in Charlotte, we got this big population center, and our closest radar or cell phone tower is in Greer, South Carolina. So it makes it incredibly difficult. It's not that we don't have any coverage. I don't want to make it feel like, we're in this giant hole. We just have degraded coverage. We have really poor coverage. We have 1 bar on our cell phone. We want 5 bars. So what we're trying to do is get that radar closer, because the radar beam, as you see in the picture right there, thanks, James, the radar beam goes in a straight line, but the earth curves. So by the time the radar beam gets to Charlotte, depending on which part of Charlotte you're in, it's at 8,000 to as much as 10,000 feet above our heads. Tornadoes happen down in the lowest 1,000 or lower. So missing a lot of these tornadoes is a problem with the radar gap. And so I hope going forward that this problem will get solved. For years, we tried doing this back 10 years ago, and we went through federal issues, and it's just dealing with the government sometimes incredibly difficult to get things. But now that we have this private-public partnership, it's the closest we've been to solving this problem, because we've got local, state, and even private entities involved, and the data is going to be public and free for everybody.
Speaking of partnerships, I wanted to ask Brad and Shane and Tim. Unfortunately, a lot of our other guests had to jump off because they have a 10 p.m. newscast. But in this era of COVID-19, you guys aren't in the weather center with your fellow meteorologists. You're doing a lot of work from home. How was the communication preparing for this event? Was it any different? I mean, I know you wasn't personally beside the meteor, but was the communication still there? Was there anything that you think maybe could have done went better or not as good? I mean, any comments on that?
We over communicated, and the only reason that I really over communicated was watching Ryan Vaughn in Jonesboro a couple weeks ago work from home and cover a tornado there, and I thought, it gave me a little sigh of relief saying it could be done, but they still had somebody in studio. So we talked a lot over the weekend. We had probably 2 or 3 Zoom calls over the weekend talking about coverage. And I said, if this was not COVID-19, I would be in the studio right now. And luckily my general manager and news director said, you know what, we want you in the studio too. So for the first time in a month, I was actually in the studio instead of home. And I worked in the morning show. Normally I'm an evening shift person. But I came in and tag team with Larry. We did do social distancing. We never crossed paths. We stayed away. I stayed in one location, which unfortunately meant I didn't get to go to the key wall, but I could be in the weather center with a standing shot and do it. So I think, and to answer your question, Scotty, we actually over communicated, probably more so than we ever had, because we knew the logistics of this was going to be really problematic.
Yeah, just to echo that, we did the similar thing. We had the fun part about planning is you get to be on Zoom calls with your boss like every other day, right? So we had a lot of Zoom calls just like this, and it made planning a little bit more tricky because we really had to advocate for the necessity of being in the studio. And it's not just a presentation thing, like that's somewhat cosmetic, but I don't have a generator at my house. None of the folks on our weather team do. So that was really the thing. What if, and we have 3 folks working, but it could sure happen that all of us lose power. So we really needed to be there. But when we were, I was at we have a separate room key wall. I was there. I didn't talk to anybody.
You can see Ruben is
and
zooming.
then in the studio, Taran Kirksey was there in front of a monitor wall with a computer with our graphics. And we had another meteorologist at home just doing like this and Facebook and stuff. So it really worked out well, but it was more planning and, just jumping through all the hoops that we all have to do just to go to the grocery store or something like that now. Strange.
Yeah, I think kind of just like adding on top of that, this situation has brought anything, it's teaching everyone, in a communication field how to communicate even more, or the importance of communicating more. In our case, we are still fully broadcasting from our station. We don't work from home. I typically will do noon shows twice a week, and then I do double shifts on the weekend, all of our morning and all of our evening shows. So I'm usually the only one in the station for the meteorologists on Saturdays and Sundays anyway. So I was closely monitoring it. And whenever I saw it on one of my weekday shifts, I think I had sent an email out and said, I think we should go ahead and just start having a plan in place. This is our first time trying it with social distancing. So I think it's even more important that we start planning further in advance. And I just think these are times like this where you do learn how crucial communication is between a team. And I think it really applies for all fields, not just our specific industry. We started it with an email chain. We did not do Zoom conference calls because I don't like my employer to know how many times I'm wearing pajamas when I'm on the call. So it is all on the phone only. But at the end of the day, you're keeping in touch with them. You are making sure that there's consistent points that are going to every single one at every level so that everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, I was gonna say real quick, Tim, we had that same issue. That was our biggest concern, was the generator issue.
Yeah.
You know, I have a great setup here. I'm great, but man, if I lose power, out of luck. You know, I have backup for my router, but I don't have backup power to my computer or backup power to any of the lights. So that was a big concern. And I thought for sure with just the wind field that we were going to have trees and power lines down all over the place, so we would lose power. So yeah, that was an easy call for us. And honestly, it was kind of nice to be in the station. Not that I wanted to be covering severe weather at 2 o'clock in the morning, but man, it wasn't nice. That's the first time I saw my morning meteorologist in a month. So yeah. it was really cool to be in there.
One weather thing, actually, you know, the surprising part, we talk about how many tornadoes there were. We kind of expected a lot of tornadoes. The fact that the wind field didn't materialize as much in regular severe thunderstorms, I thought was surprising. There wasn't a lot of widespread damage in the squall line. There was a lot, but not as much as I thought there maybe could have been.
Yeah, I agree. Only thing I'll say is that, and I'll give a shout out to Shay and WeatherFlow, because I have 2 WeatherFlow stations on my roof. I had 30 minutes of continuous gust over 50, which was the highest sustained gust above 50 since probably Hurricane Michael came through here. I've had those things for 2 hurricanes passing overhead, or at least the remnants, and that was by far the highest. So yeah, it was really impressive. And what happened in our viewing area was we had a lot of wake up calls. People just heard that roaring sound of the wind and the rain hitting their windows, and people were freaking out. They woke up, and so it was easy for me to get people to act because it was so loud. It woke people up from a sound sleep. That sound, and we had a lot of people sheltered in their bathroom for these straight line winds, but. Yeah, I'm surprised we didn't have more damage, Tim, but I was really impressed with the data from my roof. I looked at it and I'm like, I actually had a camera up there that swung around and broke off, and I had to fix it again because my house got hit by a tornado back in February. So and I had a 71 mile-an-hour wind gust with that storm. So it's been crazy having all these events at my house and having this data now collecting from my house. My wife's texting me. She's like, the kids are freaking out. Should we go downstairs? I'm like, yes, go downstairs.
Well, Brad, what a way to QC those stations with a camera breaking, right? And then the stations are still standing. But I mean, that's pretty impressive if you think about the mechanical features over land, how trees and other homes block wind, and you're still getting gusts like that. You could almost assume that just above homes, right at the treetop level, probably several knots stronger just because of those mechanical features. But yeah, you know, even here along the coast, just like Tim said, I was surprised we didn't see a lot of those, you know, those gust fronts or there's really strong convergences right ahead of the storms. It never really materialized here. I mean, we got 30 to 40 knots, and then maybe one little spike upwards, but we didn't see any of these big blasts of wind like we normally do here at the coastline, where the energies just drop out of the storm, and then we get a long line of really strong wind. So and that was a good thing because it was less damage over the entire area, even though we did have one tornado along the coastline, immediate coastline, and even one just inland. But you know, a lot of folks just saw a lot of heavy rain, lightning, and just some gusty wind at times. It wasn't terrible. So, I mean, there's a little bit of reprieve from that storm, at least here along the immediate South Carolina coast, except for Myrtle's Inlet area and Litchfield.
Yeah, so today's date, I think, is kind of significant too. The initial thing we were going to air today was going to be about the 2011 tornado outbreak that everybody really thinks about when they think about the strongest storm system maybe they've lived through or seen. You know, we chose to do this instead because this was such a significant severe weather outbreak. going kind of back to you, Brad, and anyone else who wants to talk about it, is there any sort of feedback that you're receiving from the public that this is going to be kind of the new thing in their heads, is there as the biggest severe weather threat that they've seen? Or how do you think this compares as far as response to what we kind of saw on April 16th, 2011?
I remember that April well, because that is the highlight of that month. But there were 4 separate significant severe weather events back in April. We had a derecho, we had baseball-sized hail, and we had the tail end of the Tuscaloosa tornado outbreak actually affect the Carolinas. And then April 16th, which I remember that night because I stayed up all night long and watched that line of supercells pass over Charlotte, not touch down, and then immediately as the sun came up, start spinning. But I think what helped us out on Monday, 2 things. One, COVID-19, everybody's home. They're sheltering in place already. But 2 was our tornado outbreak back in early February. That was still fresh in a lot of people's minds. We had significant tornadoes that morning, and that wasn't too long ago. And that was in Charlotte. That was, we had EF1 damage across a big chunk of South Charlotte, including my backyard. So I think that in the back of people's minds helped. And anybody who's worked in emergency management or done this, the level of preparedness is only as good as your memory of the last disaster. And in this case, having that last disaster kept people prepared. And so they were kind of ready for this.
Yeah, for here, this one is not going to be remembered for years for most of the Piedmont area, and at least near the Triad, I wouldn't say, except for the folks who actually were in the tornado path in Alamance County. Just to add to this time of year, it's always very busy. 2 years ago today is the anniversary of the Greensboro tornado, which is still so fresh. We had a reporter do a story today, how is East Greensboro doing? The answer is, still not great. Unfortunately, it was a really rough urban tornado, a strong EF2 that came right through the city, stayed on the ground for 30 miles, all the way up basically toward the Virginia border. And that was just 2 years ago. So for a lot of folks, that's still what they remember, or maybe it's always very personal. So if you're in High Point, you remember the High Point tornado in 2010, right? It just depends on who you are and where you've lived. For me, that April 16th event is still, way up here and everything else is way down. I was working in Wilmington, but that thing was another level. And that year was just another level of severe weather.
And I'll just add my own commentary to that. It was a year ago that we had a tornado outbreak here in the Carolinas. I don't even remember the number, but a year later, our thought is already bouncing back to 2011 and not a year ago.
Yeah, that was 12, and it was Good Friday. I remember that very clearly. You're right.
Scotty, I think that was the first time you sought shelter in your...
I remember doing that, but I couldn't remember what date it was. Like, I forgot 2 years ago. I knew the Greensboro tornado, but I didn't know it was today's date. That's
Monday the 13th is my son's birthday. And I remember on his first birthday, we were doing severe weather coverage, and on his second birthday, we were doing severe weather coverage.
Yeah, I was in the basement live on this show when that happened. So yeah, crazy times. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for coming on. As Tim was talking about, I'll go ahead and kind of let the secret out of the bag. We pre-recorded the April 16, 2011 look back. So next week we're going to be airing that. So you'll see Tim back next week on our show. He'll be with us with a lot of other great meteorologists who kind of look back over that event. So we just hope all those, especially who are affected by this tornado outbreak, our thoughts and prayers are with you guys, and hopefully you'll recover quickly. And like Tim and Brad has said, this is the peak season for severe weather in the Carolinas. So we'll continue to monitor the weather for the rest of the month and even into May as is really kind of a high peak for severe weather. So we appreciate you joining us tonight. Big thank you to all of our guests tonight. This was a last minute show, and we got coverage from every market except the Raleigh market, but I don't really think there was much going on in severe weather-wise with tornadoes in that market. So we appreciate everyone coming on tonight, and we will see you back here next Wednesday night for another edition of the Carolina Weather Group, and we hope you have a safe and happy weekend.